I figured that tis the season to discuss a bit what it is that Hoshana Rabba is about, how exactly this relates to the general theme of the Yom Noraim, and what it is that we can hope to gain or potentially to lose if we don't take full advantage of the Kedusha of the window. No, maybe a window.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I'll do it.
what the expression in the Gemara discusses Hoshana Rabba as the night at which the decrees are ultimately released. In other words, where the commands are actually doled out. So, in the context of the holidays of Tishrei, we have Rosh Hashanah, which is 2 days, or one long day. The expression, the Gemara says, Yom Harichta. We have 2 days of judgment. We do not confess on Rosh Hashanah. We have no confessing to do. Judgment is what it is. Yom Kippur, and for that matter, the week in between. This is Sephardi Center. Yom Kippur is the day on which we have the opportunity to ask for clemency in the judgment. In other words, it's not that the judgment is going to be annulled. It's not the judgment was wrong. It's not that I have any complaints or appeals against the justice of Hashem's judgment. It's only that we can ask for mercy. We can beg that Hashem give us another chance, and hopefully with the momentum of Sephardi Center, we can, between Yom Kippur itself and our genuine efforts on Yom Kippur in prayer, fasting, and confession, supplication, we hope to somehow sweeten the deal just a little bit, such that the things that we do deserve somehow to be punished for will be somewhat tempered. On Hoshana Rabba, we are not going to change the judgment. We are not even going to sweeten it. There's nothing we can do to change the rulings themselves. The only thing that we can do is prevent negative decrees from actually being exercised. In other words, it's like a check that was signed and never deposited. So it's possible that, for whatever reason, I merited some kind of a negative decree. That's how it was judged in Rosh Hashanah. I was not able to balance it or to temper it in such a way on Yom Kippur that it was stricken completely from the record. Now it's just a question of dealing with the actual execution of the judgment. L'havdil, I can give you a couple of different examples from the physical world. And when we do appear in court, typically the charges that are read against you, especially if it's traffic court, are, here's what you did. If it was speeding, if it was ignoring a traffic signal, if it was reckless endangerment of people around you, etc. And so the count is what it is. You can request clemency, you can beg for mercy at the trial itself, if you're repentant, if you're contrite. You can make a case for, it's true, I deserve all of these punishments, but maybe I'll take a defensive driver course. It's only my first offense. I've never had such a thing before. I can potentially begin to grapple with the severity of the situation. I need the car in order to drive to work, etc. So you can potentially make efforts in order to sweeten the judgment somehow. Then sometimes if it's really bad and you end up serving time anyway, you can get time off for good behavior. Get time off for the time you spent already in prison until the trial. Here you're already dealing with the judgments. You're not able to change them to adjust the rulings against you. You're not going to change your history as it appears in legal records. All you can hope to do is to negotiate within the system. So, I have to go to prison, but if the time served was at least done properly, maybe there I can find some wiggle room. So the window of opportunity is closing at a consistent pace from Rosh Hashanah through Kippur until Hoshana Rabba. And these judgments are over and done with come Simchat Torah. That's really where, Shemini Atzeret, in other words, by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll have nothing else in our tefillot regarding or concerning judgment until next year, until Tishrei. Here's a fascinating teaching of the Arizal on this topic of the Yomim HaNoraim, specifically on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shemini Atzeret, which is really the last piece of this stretch of holidays that we have in Tishrei. Arizal explains that in Gan Eden, as the situation was supposed to unfold, if Adam and Hawa were doing what they were supposed to, then they would have achieved Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Chag HaSukkot all at once. They would have been able to handle all of these different aspects of godliness, these different facets of human interaction with God, all in one day. In other words, a day of tremendous fear, at the same time, tremendous joy and love, and a merciful bridging of the gap between who we are and who we should be. It's almost impossible for us to understand such a thing, so leave it to the Arizal to say it. So go ahead and figure it out, knock yourself out with this concept. What he explains and what kind of follows this logic is that because their course of action was one that was ultimately disastrous, for whatever reasons they did what they did, what they were thinking and why they were thinking it is a topic for another discussion that we probably should have at some point. They diminished the spiritual tension in the world. They just caused the collapse of the spiritual system, referred to very often as some kind of shibirat hakelim. That means that the vessels through which spirituality was supposed to be conducted to us are greatly diminished or damaged. And so, because we're of such limited spiritual ability, and because the spiritual energy that we're dealing with is such that we couldn't digest it all at once, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, out of Rahamim, divided up these 3 holidays into 3 individual, more easily digestible pieces. So we have Rosh Hashanah that we can focus only on this one aspect, as if to clearly imply it was too much for us to do Rosh Hashanah Kippur together, so much more so Sukkot. So Rosh Hashanah is all about deen, it's all about judgment, it's all about reestablishing our conscious awareness of the fact that Hashem is the King, always was, always will be. Just our job to demonstrate it more frequently in our actions and our words. Then we have Yom Kippur, where we acknowledge that not only is Hashem the King, but His judgment is merciful. He gives us opportunities, He gives us chances, He wants us to fix ourselves, He wants us to pick up the slack. He doesn't necessarily want, at least certainly not ideally, that we should transgress and be punished and play this cat and mouse game of how many punishments can we accrue. The ideal is that we should take responsibility for ourselves and get it done. And then we have Sukkot, because it's impossible for us, in our limited understanding, to be happy, to be joyous, to celebrate on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Very interesting, because Rosh Hashanah we do have to make Kiddush. At the end of the day, it's Yom Tov. We have to cook. We have the custom to eat. The Rama says this, fatty and sweet foods. So we do indulge a little bit on Rosh Hashanah in order to demonstrate that it is a day that separates us as a nation from the rest of the world. We're happy that Hashem chose us, gave us the opportunity to serve Him. Try not to focus as much on whether or not we're serving Hashem the way we're supposed to, or to the best of our ability. That's probably more applicable for Yom Kippur. But basically, because there were too many facets to this for us to handle at once, after the Chet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu divided these 3 holidays into 3 separate occasions and separated it by a few days. So up until now, we're still friends. Without naming any names. For good. So, we come then to Hoshana Rabba, where we have our last opportunity to focus on this particular aspect of nullifying negative decrees, preventing negative decrees from being executed, from being carried out in the near or further future over the course of the next year. Another interesting comment, once again, you have the result to turn to for this. He mentions that if we were on a higher enough spiritual level, we would be able to see at midnight, or apparently right after midnight, the nishmatic reflection of the various components of our non-physical makeup, and we'd be able to tell if we were going to live through the following year or not. In other words, if we were on a high enough level, we'd have some kind of a nishmatic thermometer. We could say, look, I get this chance once a year. I could see somehow, figure out somehow, if my neshama is going to be with me for the duration of this year, or if this year is when I return my equipment. Okay, so apparently there is some kind of a connection between the neshama itself and this concept of judgment. In other words, the judgment might not be apparent. I'm not going to drop dead before Shmini Atzeret. If there's a judgment that's meant to be carried out at some point over the year, but my ability to see such a punishment coming, or to know if it's just my time for whatever divine reason was declared, this I should be able to figure out if I were on a high enough level over the course of the night of Hoshana Rabba. There's this capacity that it has to kind of reveal to us where it is that we're holding. So it's not just that the judgments are going to be rendered and the orders are going to be given. It's that I should be able to perceive this through my own neshama without necessarily prophecy, that I haven't been heard, that I haven't been told or heard that this is the case. Without a prophet coming and telling me something's going to happen over the course of this year, in theory I should be able to figure this out. So that's a little bit harder for us to explain what exactly is going on there. The neshama is complex, obviously. If we're astonished by the complexity of the physical body, we need to be completely baffled by the complexity of the neshama, how it functions. If it has these we refer to these identifiable parts of it, different components of it, different levels of it, and each one of these levels has infinite complexity to it. The typical layout, the typical framework that's discussed is that of the nefesh. The next level up would be ruach. One level beyond this would be neshama. Two other levels that we rarely discuss or deal with, in other words, certainly not outside of Kabbalistic literature, they're not really mentioned, are chaya and yechida. So the nefesh would be the lowest of all these levels. It probably is most easily identified as maybe the mind, not the brain as a physical organ per se, that's still part of the body, but the nefesh would be the mind. This is your instinctive behaviors, your habits, your routines, the things that you do, how you respond, how you react to different stimuli. Nefashot are different, but your ability to influence your own spirituality is most directly associated with the nefesh. In other words, for you to change your neshama, it's not that it's impossible, it's that it's basically impossible. You'd be aiming way too high, and you'd be shooting for something that's so far removed from you, unless you're literally there consciously, unless you know the depth behind your spirituality and your own identity. It would be very exceedingly difficult for you to have any influence in that high. So even in the Kabbalistic literature, we very rarely discuss the neshama itself and your ability to impact or influence it. You can influence it, but through the nefesh. It's based on where you're currently holding. So put in a simpler way, your nefesh is basically where the rubber meets the road. This is where most of your work, this is where the mitzvot apply. Controlling your behaviors, controlling your appetites, controlling your instincts. And this is the same nefesh that we associate with animals. Animals have desires, they have instincts, and they act on them instinctively. That's basically what they do. We don't find that animals have the ability to delay their gratification or to suppress their fear or their anger or their jealousy. And we as people are expected to do that. But the ability to control your instincts, to control your gut reactions, hinges on the ruach. Ruach would be the next level up, and it's your ruach that connects the neshama and the nefesh. In other words, your ability to think consciously, to actually reflect on how you behave and what you do, and to make adjustments, in order to rein in your nefesh and your instincts and your reactions. This depends heavily on the ruach. Your ability to take conscious awareness of yourself, to know where you stand. A good example of this would be realizing that you're angry, or that you're in the presence of something that's going to make you angry. and having the presence of mind either to control your anger altogether or to distance yourself from what's likely to cause you to do this. Same goes for temptations, if it's food, if it's sexual kind. The awareness, the ability to catch yourself before your instincts take you any further would be said to have a ruach that's in control of your nefesh. It's a much higher level, obviously, because there's a difference between doing whatever you feel like, eating whatever you feel like, going where you feel like, etc., and actually reflecting and controlling, restricting, inhibiting some of your otherwise natural responses or reactions. Your neshama is one level beyond this. Your neshama is that much more abstract. So how many people do you know that realize that they have a nefesh? That realize and respect and appreciate the value of human life, the value of spirituality, of good deeds, bad deeds, rewards, punishments, etc. I hate to break your hearts, but not that many. How many people realize that they should be in control of themselves, that they should restrict, limit their behaviors and interactions to those that are positive and productive? How to minimize the damage of negative situations and interactions? You're talking about one in many thousands, if not one in a million. Just aren't that many. The ability to influence your lifestyle, your behavior, your attitudes, to the point that good becomes instinctual, in other words, to the point that you're so in control of your ruach, which is so in control of your nefesh, that you practically have no more yitzhak hara, at least it doesn't act in typical ways. This would be someone who's already functioning at the level of the neshama. Arizal himself commenting on the Siddur, he made actually many comments on the Siddur. He was very intimately, his teachings were very intimately related with tefillah and with the version of the Siddur as we received it. The Sephardi Center was what he was commenting on. It was actually in response to his commentaries on it that large groups of Ashkenazim adopted Nusach Sfarad, which is basically Nusach Ashkenaz with the Arizal's recommendations and commentaries. So the Arizal writes like this: there are a variety of nuschaot concerning the Hashkava. Hashkava is the tefillah that the Sephardi traditionally recite after someone passes away, during the first Shiva, during the Shloshim, on the Askara itself, on what they call the Yahrzeit, the anniversary. So the traditional nusach reads, and there's a much longer one with a lot of Aramaic in it, and a much shorter one that's probably more common. So, he who has mercy on all of his creations, Hashem should have, should express, as if to say, concern, meaning Hashem should show, express care, and have mercy, pity, on the, literally, nefesh, ruach, and neshama of the deceased, so-and-so, son or daughter of so-and-so. Arizal said we should omit ruach and neshama from this paragraph. He said we're lucky to be speaking of the nefesh, but to make any associations or any implications that the individual who passed away had a relationship with his or her ruach or neshama was mighty pretentious in his eyes. He said we're so far removed from the levels that would justify, that would warrant, such a tefillah. He said that this may be applied to the generations of antiquity. We're nowhere near them. And his advice was, he said as a matter of fact, that to go ahead and to make mention of this probably causes more prosecution of the deceased than actual mercy, because just mentioning the fact that he or she had a ruach or a neshama, and probably like the overwhelming majority of everyone in the world, never actually achieved control or perfection of them, is to imply that we want them to be judged at the level of the neshama and the ruach. And who could stand such a thing? Who could live up to this kind of judgment? So the minhag is what it is, but that's his recommendation. Avoid at all costs any reference to ruach and neshama, because we have no idea what we're talking about. It's on rare occasion that we're able to control ourselves, and that's a miracle. To be so in control of ourselves that we get it right most of the time, it's the definition of a tzaddik. But to be in a situation or a position where your instincts are so tightly under control that mistakes just don't happen, or that your Yitzhak was completely subdued, he said, far be it from us to even pretend anyone that we know alive reached this kind of level. We would cause more persecution with the deceased and their soul than pity or mercy.
And the minhag is still to say that?
The minhag is what it is. we have to defend, I guess, the version of the Siddur as we received it. Perhaps the explanation is that, and I don't want to pretend that I know something that Rizal didn't, but that Chazal, our ancestors must have known that there are very few people who actually reach this level. And nonetheless, they felt it was appropriate for us to beseech Hashem. Maybe it doesn't sound so clear from the paragraph as it stands, but maybe requesting mercy for their the shortcomings of the ruach and the neshama. We are asking for mercy at the end of the day. It's not like we're actually saying, please,
And there is also this concept that when you do a eulogy, you tend to kind of overpraise the deceased to a certain degree.
I am not going to advocate for or against the custom. I will just state simply that Chabad has the custom not to eulogize anyone, period. Have you ever been to a Lubavitch funeral or a funeral officiated by a Lubavitcher? It's they are very adamant about this. They just don't give eulogies. They don't give a speech.
What you said, a criticism of that particular prayer, or was it a criticism of a person just that they shouldn't make it seem as though they had actually? Because if it's a prayer that Chazal said to say, so maybe there's no, you say that because of Chazal.
It doesn't appear in the Talmud. As a matter of fact, and this is a very fascinating point, there's very little reference to the Shema in the Talmud. For that matter, the Torah itself, and there are reasons for this. The Rizal explains very explicitly in many places, the Torah really addresses the nefesh.
What about Elohai Shenatata B'Torah?
The Shema Shenatata B'Torah, correct. No, this is an ancient prayer. This goes back to most likely to Chazal himself, Shechus Torah. So we don't have that many of them. That happens to be one reference, a very explicit reference. Where else can you suggest in our tefillah that we have such thing? So this is in Tehillim. So it's David HaMelech again, and it's a rare reference. And the Gemara actually explaining this, the Gemara says, Al kol neshima unshima, right? You should praise Hashem for every breath that you take. So the Shema is actually associated with neshima, with your ability to breathe. In other words, ruach as a spirit also has to do with air, with wind, allegorical reference.
Nishmat kol chai.
Nishmat kol chai.
Ner Hashem nishmat adam.
Right, so that was composed later. Ner Hashem nishmat adam is a pasuk in Ner Hashem nishmat adam kol chofes kol hamri batim. Pasuk in Tehillim, if I'm mistaken. So, Kidor mitzvah v'torah v'dach hem tochot musar is b'shnei. But Ner Hashem nishmat adam, these are a handful of people. And the vast majority of references that you will find in the Tanakh refer specifically to nefesh, sometimes to ruach. Ruach we have by Noach. Kol asher bo ruach haim, right? Ruach nishmat haim appears once. And Hashem at the creation of Adam and Hawa, pach b'atar nishmat, right? Sorry, pach b'atar. Yeah, pach b'atar. I remember it right now. Nishmat Chaim, Ruach Hamarala is how the Ukulus translates it. Yeah, Hashem.
No, it says by
Nishmat Chaim. Nishmat Chaim. And the reason I was confused because
But it's also by Adam, the Nefesh Chaya.
Ukulus reads Ruach. Ruach Hamarala, that Hashem gave Adam a spirit capable of speech. And so if this is the major difference between us and the animals, it goes without saying that the Ruach is more pronounced by us. In other words, our ability to control ourselves begins with this, just like our ability to communicate. If I can communicate with you and tell you, watch out, it looks like your wheels are about to come off the wagon, you look angry, don't respond, hang on to it, you'll deal with it some other time. You can be reasoned with. My ability to communicate ideas to you, to tell you that I'm offended or insulted or upset or whatever, or that you look like you are. We can share ideas without acting or behaving in crazy ways. And without the situation getting out of control, and this distinguishes us from the animals. The neshama is the origin of this ability. It's a level much closer to Hashem. So the Arizal was just, maybe the comment was more that he just didn't recommend this particular tefillah for us. If it was applicable or appropriate back in the day, it wasn't anymore in his eyes. And this is only 500 something years ago, so draw your own conclusions on how much spiritual the world has become. I will omit any references to the city of New York. Or to its various neighborhoods, etc. You'll have to draw your own conclusions. So, okay, chapter 1, chapter 2, now chapter 3. So we have such a thing as the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. They're very infrequently referred to, even in Scripture. And the higher up you go, the less frequent references become. You have also a reference in Tehillim to the Chaya, Chayati, and Yechidati. And one time those two do appear reference to David himself. But he was at this level that he could make reference to such madrigot, to such heights, and we simply are not. So, what is it exactly that's going on Hoshana Rabba? How does this relate to judgment of the neshama actually being able to feel this? Well, it kind of goes without saying that the higher level you're on, the more sensitive you are to certain spiritual things. Right? I'll tell you a fascinating story that I once told to Rosh Hashanah. My grandmother told me this. I spoke to her about it. I'll give an explanation to it. My grandmother's youngest brother, Hoshana Rabba, today he has to be around 70. I think he had much younger. He came to Israel in the I think maybe in 64, in the 64, and he was drafted into the army. He was a paratrooper, and he served in 1967. And so one night during the war campaign, my grandmother has this dream. She's dreaming of her father, who he was a bit heavy towards the end of his life. He had diabetes also, and so his daughters would come every Friday to help him get ready for Shabbat. Trim his hair, comb it, help him polish his shoes, get things together, etc. So one of the things they do is that help him cut his nails. So pretty much towards the end of his life. So my grandmother sees her father, and my great-grandfather, and he appears very distraught in this dream. And she figures that maybe he needs her help, so she kind of makes an effort to approach him, as if to say, "Come, let me fix your nails. We'll get ready for Shabbat." And he sits there tearing it off, as if he was angry or upset. So she wakes up very disturbed from this dream. Turns out that night, her brother's position was shelled near Gesher Allenby, the Allenby Bridge between Yericho and Jordan, and he lost both of his legs. One leg just above the knee, one leg just below it. So and she had this bizarre dream. They thought he was dead. They didn't even know he was alive. They put him in a stack of bodies they were clearing out, just because someone heard him make a sound afterwards. They realized he was still alive. For rehab, etc. So I spoke to Sabbato about this. We had a little discussion about dreams and their many interpretations. We said, look, the higher level you're on spiritually, or the more directly related, or more closely associated you are with something, naturally the more sensitive you are. So you're more sensitive to things that might be wrong in your family than you are to things that are wrong in other people's families. And if you're on a high spiritual level, you're much more sensitive to yourself. You're much more conscious and aware of yourself, what's going on in your life, where you're holding, etc. So he said this would be the equivalent of someone throwing a rock and breaking a window in your neighborhood. Now, the closer you are to the incident itself, the louder and the more clearly you hear it, and it influences those that are, in the closest of the concentric circles of influence, and naturally less those that are further out. So a sibling is obviously something very, very close, and it's a support. On the one hand, to be that close to someone that you can actually get these non-physical messages and interpret them and understand them in useful way. So I'll tell you many other stories along these lines. I'll put a bookmark in. I wasn't going to tell you that a long time. So if you were spiritually sensitive enough, in other words, to your own neshama, you'd be able to perceive how well attached it is to the ruach and the nefesh, or if it started to burst a seam and really wants to take off, doesn't want to be here anymore, for whatever variety of reasons. Naturally, avirot don't make the neshama especially happy about its desk job. It's not doing anything that meaningful for you. It would just as go back to the source of life and not have to do with these spiritual things. So this is a concept that's first mentioned in the Sefer Hasidim. Sefer Hasidim is actually centuries old. He writes that 40 days before someone passes away, the nishmatic vibe gets sent out. And if you're sensitive to it, if you're tuned into that frequency, you can pick up on it. I know at least a few stories. I can tell you one guy that I knew. His grandfather, so this guy, I think his grandfather, the family had been in Sfat for centuries, for at least 4 or 5 centuries. His grandfather, about a month before he passed away, he quit his job. This is 60 years ago. He quit his job. He got on trains and hopped all around Israel and went to apologize to every one of his relatives and former business associates. He just made a whole circuit, just a tour of Israel. It's great to see you. I hope you're great. Remember that time that I did something that you got upset about? I just wanted to ask you forgiveness if that's okay. I feel really bad about it. I'm still regretful of it, etc. About 30 days later, he came home, told the family that he's ready to go. He's apologized to everyone. He said he saw it coming, and like that. He just went peacefully and knew that it was on its way. So we have sources that indicate this is a possibility that people who are sensitive to it will be able to pick up on it. So it's not a promise that on Hoshana Rabba everybody knows what's going on with them, but if you were sensitive, this would be the time to look into it, to pick up on it, so to speak. And as such, the tradition, the custom has been that we stay up all night learning Torah in order to, I guess, make that last ditch effort, to do what we can to not tip the scales in our favor, to accrue merits that will hopefully help balance out what judgments are being rendered. Connect this concept to the concept that we mentioned in the very beginning about Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, and Sukkot being, ideally having been one tremendously special, holy, and uplifting reality, and then having to be broken down into component parts in order for us to properly identify with the mood of the day and get as much of it out of them as we can spiritually. There is such a concept, nishmatically speaking as well, that the neshama itself is so vast and so incomprehensible to us that although the goal is to achieve perfection, we're not always able to do it in one shot. And so sometimes references are clear and go back quite a while. Rabbi Avidan spoke about this in his drashot. And so it becomes necessary for the neshama to come back, different time, different shape, different form. We may or may not realize or appreciate it. We wouldn't necessarily remember anything from the previous time that we were here. The Zohar is replete, chapters and chapters on this topic. The Zohar is a whole book dedicated to the topic. And he describes this concept in very great detail and gives very many examples of it. Fascinating idea. Hoshana Rabba brings down the name of the Avidan. So he explains, look, in general, it's very difficult for us to achieve perfection in any given lifetime. And sometimes the best we can do, not to say we shouldn't try, but the best we can do is to perfect a few mitzvot. A couple of mitzvot that I feel I'm particularly connected to, that I find especially difficult when I work on them. You work on them, and you reach the root, so to speak, of the concept of the idea. You go through a couple of challenges, trials, tribulations, and then you just kind of get it. You made an acquisition, you broke something, you made a breakthrough. So if up until now it was very difficult for you to give tzedakah, regardless of how much money you had or thought you had or did that. You work on it, you practice, you learn a little bit about it, and then it can sink in. You can change this habit. You may not be able to perfect all 613 mitzvot. It's a crying shame. We should really try. And obviously, you get more merit the more work you do, and the harder the mitzvot are for you, etc. You may not necessarily perfect everything in one shot, but you may be given a merciful opportunity from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come back and try again. And in this way, not that it's ideal, but that Hashem, out of mercy, allows us the opportunity to work on things, give us more than one shot, more than one try. You might come back with certain mitzvot still easy for you, the ones that you did successfully connect with and live up to in the past. And the mitzvot that are difficult for you, explains the Arizal. These are the ones that you need to work on extra hard. These are all the mitzvot are holy and important and special, but these may be the reason you came back. These may be your number one priority in Olam Hazeh as it currently stands. This is your overdue, outstanding balance from a previous lifetime. The fact that they are difficult for you still is evidence of the fact that they have not yet been completely assimilated, completely adopted by you. A very fascinating reference is also made to Moshe Rabbeinu. This concept is referred to as Eibur, literally like pregnancy. Now, sometimes a neshama can be impregnated in spiritual terms, whatever that means, with a bit or a part or a piece of an influence from another neshama. In other words, if you work especially hard on a particular mitzvah, it's possible for your neshama to be granted as a gift a certain boost from the neshama, the tzaddik or tzaddiket, who worked especially hard on that mitzvah, and it can help you accomplish your goals. Unfortunately, doing not so good things will sometimes help you connect to mission, what we're going to talk about. But doing good, positive things, this is one of the explanations, like a part of the spiritual explanation for how things become easier for you. Sometimes, after trying for a very long time, all of a sudden something just, a light goes off. You wake up, and all of a sudden you have it, you feel it, and you're on a roll. And the influence would dissipate if you do averot. But Shema Tzaddik, even the influence of it would not stick around for that kind of role. Moshe Rabbeinu, says Rav Chaim Vital, at the border of Jordan and Israel, when he knew already said to Ibrahim, he knows that he's not going to Eretz Israel. So he described in Torah Devarim how this, this awareness is already with him. He's giving us the last directions and instructions that we need in order to enter Eretz Israel, and hopefully the left tower will reveal what we need to remember, what we need to focus on, mitzvot that are repeated for a variety of reasons. And when he describes that Hashem, how this decree came about, he says, "Vayit'aber Hashem bi l'ma'anchem." So Ivra in Hebrew means anger. At the same time, Ibur means pregnancy. Two very difficult concepts. Well, it's not that difficult to understand based on what we just said. When you become angry, right? When you lose your spirituality, so the neshama, your anger is an influence almost like pregnancy in a sense, that your neshama is impregnated with a very negative and detrimental influence. You may not be familiar with this concept from Roshat Lasso by the Sotah. How the Gemara points out there's a machloket told twice. Here's what happens, actually 3 times. I was thinking it's mentioned that a man has this discussion with his wife, and right? And then this is this, and it goes on and repeats. Here's the Torah, the Sotah, that if this is what happens, and her husband calls her out, identifies this particular guy, and says, "Do not do something." So the expression is "Va'avra ala urach kina." La'avor in Hebrew, so here we have Ibra, Ibur, and La'avor, all in the same group. Va'avra ala urach kina v'kinat ishto. What happened to this man? A spirit of jealousy came over him. Literally, he was overcome by this spirit of jealousy. And then he made this kind of like an assertion of his jealousy. In other words, for her to be caught in seclusion with someone, it's not a very flattering circumstance, but it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the marriage unless, God forbid, they made a terrible mistake. If he told her, in the presence of the witnesses, I don't want you secluding yourself with this man anymore, and she were to be caught even by one of the witnesses, then she already becomes a sultan, meaning she needs to go through this process in order to verify if this wasn't the case. She can confess, she can admit, but that's what the whole parasha with the order and the parchment is all about. So what's the nature of this spirit that overcomes this gentleman? The spirit that comes over him, the spirit of jealousy. What's the nature of it? What's the explanation?
I think there.
Where else in the Torah do you see that there's a spirit comes over someone? The Torah doesn't talk this way. And here we're talking about ruach, by the way, not nefesh, right? Ruach. Shaul HaMelech, we have, right, the very fascinating references to him too. We should really go to that at some point. By Shaul, we see ruach ra'ah meva'atito. Everyone in his kingdom, everyone in his palace could see that there was an evil spirit, a bad spirit, that was, literally it sounds like it was frightening him, or it was perturbing him. A little bit hard to explain that expression. So, right, it doesn't, meaning it's not the same terminology, the same phraseology, that the spirit passed over him or overcame him. But ruach ra'ah meva'atito. It was a bad, evil spirit that was irritating him negatively. You have a question?
No, I think you responded.
So as typical of the Gemara, to pick up on these repetitions or these unique phraseologies, this ruach that overcomes him, there's a machloket among Chazal as to whether this ruach is something positive or something negative. But the Ruach we have by Yaakov, by Paro. But the Ruach we have Yaakov v'yafog libo by Yaakov. Paro it's very it's very overwhelmed with the dreams. So literally, you found like his heart was beating. He got excited. His blood pressure was up. He didn't know what to do. So one opinion is that this ruach that overcomes this man is a ruach kedusha. This is a Holy Spirit. It's a positive thing. Kosh Baruch Hu created the world in such a way that men and women come together in order to procreate. Some of us do more than just make children. There's actually a relationship. There's actually love, affection. We appreciate the dissonance, the similarities, the differences. We come together and construct something tremendous. And the holiness around this marriage concept, very much under attack today, but the holiness around this marriage concept is such that the concept is absolutely meaningless if this relationship is not respected, if the relationship is not upheld. What's a marriage if it's not, at least in some way, exclusive? Yes, we do find that the Torah permits polygamous relationships. We didn't find too many examples of them working out so well, but in theory it's possible. And Leah, even though, halachically viable process, she's upset, she's hurt, it's painful to her. And this is exactly what happened. In other words, the divisions between who's the son of which mother are what caused Yosef to be sold and the whole Balagat to start. And this is how we ended up in Egypt in the first place. So, it needed to be for that particular generation because these children needed to be born. And getting them to get together, to get along, has been an ongoing challenge since then. So, Ruach Kedusha, according to the one opinion, this is a holy spirit that overcomes this individual. And this is the Gemara telling you, the Midrash repeats this, this is the Gemara telling you that it's possible that you be under the influence of some spirit that comes to you from somewhere else. I don't think it's an allegorical reference to people's mood swings. You don't find this particular phraseology anywhere else in the Torah. You've been overcome by a spirit of holiness, meaning you've been motivated, the etymologically proper term for this is inspired. You've been inspired. The concept of inspiration, familiar with this? the Greeks standing over fermenting wine, breathing in the alcoholic vapors.
Inspired.
This is the ancient Greeks freebasing alcohol. And they were inspired because, right, spiritus, a spirit, and you are inspired when you breathe the spirit into you, it becomes a part of you, attaches to you. Expire when you take your last breath. Exhale.
Could it be that Kedusha means like monogamy, as we know that it means, right? So maybe Ruach Kedusha meant he's worried about monogamous anger, so to speak, that she's not being monogamous.
That's interesting. We have a Rashi that mentions, I believe it's in the Midrash, that Roshat Kedushim Tihiyu,
Right, I'm saying
which
that.
has all of these relationships very detailed, all these different relationships that are forbidden. And Rashi says, why is this particular parasha, what parasha in the Torah? This parasha is called Kedushim Tihiyu, because he said, anyone who avoids forbidden sexual relationships is called Kadosh. It is very much related to what we're going to say in a few minutes, how holiness is a tremendously large and
That's why they
multifaceted diamond.
Kedusha is also because she's promiscuous rather than monogamous.
Right, so either it's a euphemism, she is everything but holy, this woman, or it's a reference to the fact that she has dedicated her life to the ultimate form of impurity. She has absolutely consecrated herself.
Right, I'm saying that's why maybe it would make sense on Ruach Kedusha, meaning that he was suspecting her of fidelity, meaning of not monogamy, so it makes sense to use that word Kedusha.
Well, monogamy would be him having only one wife.
Whatever, but it means like he's assuming she's like a Kedusha, or that she's like not Kedusha, in the sense that she's not one.
This concept of being dedicated only to him.
Exactly. So the Kedusha, which is dedication to the relationship, dedication to the rules and regulations that are set forth by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is not there. So he is inspired, he's overcome by this Ruach Kedusha, because how could anyone tolerate such a thing? You know, this is the life that I'm hopefully providing for, adores and cherish and admiring, etc. And she goes and does something like this. So if it's a positive thing, then he really wants to make sure that she's devoted, dedicated to him, and the Mei Sota, these waters, will verify that. The other opinion says, no, it's a Ruach HaShtut. It's a Ruach Tum'ah. This is an unholy spirit that overcomes it. Why would you suspect a woman, this is even after he's told her not to seclude herself with this guy, she went ahead and did it. Well, what makes people suspicious of each other? Impurity. Impurity. People assuming someone else is doing something wrong begins with, familiar with this concept, right? You accuse people of doing something wrong, generally it's because you yourself are guilty of this. What I said, you call somebody mamzer, we should probably look into your yichus. If you call someone else stingy, it's a way of like diverting attention from you and calling it out to someone else. You accuse someone else of being stingy or lazy or whatever it is, probably you're sensitive to this, maybe because you have this challenge yourself. And it's something that you're allergic to and yet unable to overcome on your own, so you can admit your flaws in a certain, maybe conscious or subconscious way, but then you're still much better pointing them out on other people than you are accepting the blame and responsibility on yourself. So it's a dispute. It's not resolved. This influence that came over this person is a positive and negative thing. It's beneficial or it's deleterious. It's good or bad. It's not so good. It could be good. It could be bad. It could have come from a good place. It could have come from a bad place. Maybe he himself. I'm not using an expression like this. A man is disloyal to his wife. He shouldn't be surprised that she's disloyal to him. To his relationships have this reciprocal kind of mutual streak to them that you devote yourself and you invest, and the other party feels the need, the urge to do the same. When you're detached or you're invested in something else, it gets across.
Well, it's reciprocal also that you create your own monster. If he says this and he wasn't correct, that means he's overly jealous, which means that probably he's not sensitive to her. She has friends that she talks to and she opens her heart to. And the more jealous he shows that he is, the more she's afraid to do it in his sight. All the more reason to do it in seclusion, when all she wants to do is just talk to somebody.
It's also a knife in the heart of the relationship. Because if you suspect her for doing nothing wrong, then she just can't win. everything she does is going to come down with suspicion. If it's based on nothing, then there's nothing she can expect to do because it's go away. You're basically telling her, I don't trust you. And it doesn't always have the effect of making her want you to trust her. She's going to be disenfranchised, be alienated. That's the way people are. So, not just women, but others too. So, we have this interesting concept where the Torah itself tells us there is such a thing as you being inspired or motivated, and it's described literally as some other spirit connecting to you. If you're on a high enough level, if you're on a level where you really breathe Kedusha, and this is just incomprehensible to you how someone could do such a thing. Not even do such a thing, someone could even do something similar to it. It's not that he caught her in the act, he's saying, I saw her seclude herself with a guy, I wonder about, it's just too, why should I even be having these concerns when I'm in a marriage, and when at least I am dedicated to making it work. So if that's the case and it's coming from the holy side of the neshama, fantastic. Maybe it was even a certain boost, a certain surge in spirituality that he felt that brought him to this conclusion. It could well be that this came from an unholy place. That what appears to be something positive and something spiritual and something genuine is actually just tum'ah in disguise. This is someone who is making claims of holiness, waving the banner of holiness, when in reality all he has is suspicions and conspiracy theories in his head, and he's probably thinking about things that he himself is probably, if not doing, then fantasizing about where these things come from. So we have this concept. The Gemara explains like this. According to that opinion that says this is a ruach tum'ah, it's corroborated by an invitation that we have. En adam hoteh, ela im ken avra alahu ruach shtut. No man sins unless or until he has been overcome by a spirit of insanity, spirit of craziness. So you would say, okay, exercised poor judgment. I had too much to eat. Well, that's necessarily what we're talking about. Here we're talking about being literally overcome, having invited some kind of a neshmatic influence that just tips the scales in favor of Yitzhak Hara.
So in that case, ruach is not literal, meaning it's not.
Why is it not literal?
Well, I asked the question, is it literal or not?
I'm asking you the question, you answer.
I would wonder why the ruach of tumah of shtut instead of being a nefesh of shtut.
For us to say that it's a nefesh of shtut means like some nefesh came to, that would be like my friend came and told me do this. And so his nefesh interacting with mine, we're not used to thinking of the nefesh in terms of being influenced this way. But the ruach, your ability to control yourself,
It's very interesting.
has been compromised. Why? Because you exposed yourself. That's the missing piece of all this. The Gemara makes it sound like it's raining spirits that walk outside, tiptoe between them, because if you happen to get hit by a bad nishmatic raindrop, then you're going to make mistakes all day. It begins with you exposing yourself to this. And by making a conscious decision to go that route, you're going to get spiritual help. Familiar with this expression from the Gemara? You've heard this before? Whatever path you choose to go down, you'll be assisted. What on earth does that mean? If I'd like to do the right thing, I would expect Hashem to help me. If I want to do the wrong thing, I'd like to be on mountain. So this is the Gemara says, because we have some, other teachings to the contrary. Someone who comes to purify him or herself, like I really want to do teshuvah, you should expect help. Habali tameh, says the Gemara, you want to contaminate yourself, the door's open. No one's going to be pushing you. Reality pushes you. That's the truth. The overwhelming majority of the world is like this. You'll get your help, but not necessarily from above. Hashem's not going to push you down.
That's mentioned by Bilam. It's brought down by Bilam.
Correct. That Hashem did not. That's right. Hashem
That line,
you choose the path, and you will be assisted. So, what form does this assistance take?
Like with Bilam, that he voices different on purpose, does it? He wasn't.
I'm not going to call you Torah, but go ahead.
Well, you know what I'm saying, though, right?
Right. So what the Gemara says that the path down which you choose to go, you're going to be assisted. But How's this assistance manifest? What did he do, or what happened with him, or for him, or around him with this work? Well, in the beginning he wanted to go, and Hashem recommended against it. You asked, here's the answer. You pushed it, and Hashem said, go ahead, if this is what you want to do, it. Just don't curse anyone's God. He's not the Jewish nation. And he goes. Efforts were made to derail his efforts, to distract him.
And not to stop him
His
because of
donkey
that.
goes that way. And then in the end, when push comes to shove and he finally overcomes the initial obstacles, prophecy comes. He pushes, he tries, and in the end he realizes it's not going to work. If I try to curse them, what comes out is a blessing. So he gives them a backhanded blessing, which is very tricky, because the Gemara says all those blessings turn into curses. Except for Matov Olech Yaakov, one pasuk that didn't turn into a klala was this one. So, again, what does that mean? If you choose to go a certain route, you should expect some kind of assistance. Well,
You said Yonah was the opposite, but maybe because he had a mission to do.
he had a mission. Hashem told him exactly what to
He
do.
wanted to do something
He
he wanted
tried
to do, and
to-
God didn't let him at every point. He
Well,
stopped
as a prophet,
Right. He had
as a
mission.
prophet, it's not only that. A prophet, HaKovesh is Mubarak, the Gemara says, he's Chayav Stila. Someone who receives prophecy and refuses to pass it on.
Right, but he wanted
is
to
liable
die.
for capital punishment.
He was happy to die.
Hashem saved his
God
life.
didn't let him die. He realized that he couldn't even commit suicide.
He was
That's what he
prepared.
got.
When he told them that it was because of him and the lot fell on him,
I'm saying, but when he realized that he couldn't even die, that's when he changed.
he
He threw him in the water, and he didn't die. He sits under the sun,
theory,
in the sun,
if
and he
you
can't
understand
die.
the story, no, if you understand the story literally, and he was swallowed by this whale or whatever it was, then in theory he could have died there. He changes that when he decides he doesn't want to die. He
Only
decides
after
he
he's
comes
there
to
3 days.
realization.
I mean, according to if you read the Pasuk straight,
Literally,
he was in there 3 days. After 3 days, he must have realized, okay, God is not going to let me die. And then comes this big transformation for whatever reason, which is not really clear.
that, or you can read it as an almost failed suicide attempt.
I'm saying it.
He did try.
That's what I mean.
Right.
I said he was thrown. He couldn't.
In other words,
He wanted to die. He allowed him to. He told him to throw him.
Hashem gave
He
him one
couldn't
more
die.
chance, and now he's kind of
And
regretting the
then
fact that
he's
he doesn't
in the
know.
belly of the animal, of this fish.
He has to come.
sees
Yeah,
God is not letting me die.
he has to come to the point that he regrets having tried to kill himself in order to merit being.
And then later on, when he's sitting under the tree, right, he's so passive.
And then he
doesn't-
asks to die. Then he literally
I'm saying,
asks to
I'm saying again, he's asking to die. He's like
Yeah.
totally passive. He doesn't get up and walk away from the sun. He just wants to sit there and wants to die. But all throughout, it's like
Passes out, ready to go. Yeah.
God
That's it.
doesn't
So,
let him do what he wants to do.
but Hashem interacts with him as a Navi. He merits at least the interaction. Short of prophecy, all you have is reality. And if you decide that you want to do something impure and you decide to go ahead with it and it works, that's a disaster. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen. Because you decided you wanted to do this, you will be assisted. So how does it? What form does this assistance take? The Kabbalistic explanation is that there are neshamot that are eagerly looking to connect with you, pass on their influence, and take it. It's a bad example, but one I can't help but remembering every so often. Famous musician Jim Morrison died. I don't think he was even 30 of alcoholism. Of all places he chose to die was Paris. To draw your own conclusions. And every year, people, I don't know if he decided that it would happen, so every year on his yard site, people come and pour alcohol on his grave. What do you think? Like, reading
There
about
are a
this
bunch of
thing.
stories about what happens on his grave in Paris. It's like,
Yeah, well, so, it's one thing
All
to
year
live
long.
the life of debauchery. His father was a very high-ranking officer in the Marines too, military household, the second right? That's a discipline. So it's one thing to live the life of debauchery, but if this is what you inspired, and generation after generation, people are still heeding your call, there is still a relationship, music, the attitude, the lifestyle, etc. There's something terribly perverse about this, but those kind of influences live on. People really still connect with this and want to pass it on and continue living this lifestyle. So this is, nishmatically speaking, certain influences from the neshama of someone not so good can connect to a person. And even especially in the Gemara, like if you see a Rasha who's on a roll, stay away from him, be careful, don't start with him, because you have to be sensitive to the fact that there is a certain degree of assistance. And Hashem allows it for the sake of allowing free will, and they can cause damage. And people who want to contaminate themselves are certainly capable of doing it. The world's full of them. And this is because it can't be a tilted game in favor of good. It can't be only people who do good and work good actually get what they want, what they're looking for. And so Hashem allows these influences to work the other way as well. In the case of Moshe Rabbeinu.
There's a famous Ramban says about Paro, that, like, talking about his free will, that he said he hardened his heart, God hardened Paro's heart. No human being would be able to withstand all the miracles that God did through Moshe and so on. And so it really would have caved in. And so God hardened his heart in order to equalize things, to give Paro the possibility of free choice.
Yeah.
And as Paro wanted to stand up to God, but God's might was so overwhelming it wasn't fair anymore. So God enabled him to continue in his path of rebellion by giving him strength.
Which is what he wanted in the beginning.
Right.
Oh, if you would ask him, he said, I'll never give up, I'll never let them go, etc. So he needed some kind of assistance. It was supernatural.
Right. So that's the answer. Like, how is it fair that God hardened his heart? It's not his free will. So Rabban answer is, no, it was his free will. His will was to try.
He wanted
to resist, and God helped him, gave him the courage,
gave him the assistance he was looking for. So here's a fascinating concept. This pasuk, Moshe Rabbeinu describing his punishment from Hashem as "Vayit'aber Hashem bi l'ma'achem." It's a very bizarre pasuk because what does it mean? Hashem got angry at me. Hashem's wrath, came out on me. L'ma'achem, for you, like for your own good. Well, it seems to imply that Hashem's punishing Moshe was for everybody's own good. We mentioned this before. It could be that by Moshe going to Eretz Yisrael, maybe a lot of them were not going to, and so. The punishment came out in such a way as, he takes responsibility for his decision, and the rest of them are able to squeak by. Chaim Vital reads like this: this is an allusion to this Kabbalistic concept of Ibur. But Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was so tremendous that the nation was on such a low and undeserving level that they didn't have the zechut to have Moshe come along with them. The only way that they could tolerate this kiddusha was for the Neshama Moshe to come in piece by piece. In other words, not a tremendous, overwhelming Neshama that no one understands, unfortunately no one listens to. But the influence of Moshe, aspects of his Neshama, assisting people throughout the various generations. In other words, that Moshe was not allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael as one intact Neshama, but rather because we're on such a low level, it needed to be broken down and scattered over different generations, such that piece by piece we can connect, understand, appreciate, and then build back up. This is where we started from with Hoshana, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. How life is tough, these challenges are difficult. Our generation probably faces much greater challenges than the previous ones did. Our grandparents and great-grandparents had to deal with poverty, anti-Semitism, etc. They didn't have to deal with the internet. This massive information and disinformation superhighway.
Well, it's a double-edged sword because it brings you Torah in a minute and it gives you the worst things also in the same minutes.
And most of the people who connect to the internet are looking for one or the other.
No, it's not the question.
What's more widely disseminated, and which websites never crash?
It's up to us.
Well, that's correct.
We have an opportunity, and it's too bad to miss it.
Well, that's why we are reporting. We want to share.
Right, exactly. The hope of disseminating more kedusha and discouraging people from making terrible mistakes. Absolutely.
But Moshe Rabbeinu, by the way, says, right,
he also uses
that
this
thing.
expression, right?
Lo ta'afor,
He doesn't push it by Chanan.
right, I'm saying, Vayit'aber, it's like,
Wait, Aber Hashem bi l'ma'achem is where he explains what happened that Hashem will let him go in.
right, I was like, I'm begging to go in.
But that's the other side. Ibrana,
Lo ta'afor, it's the same.
So this is perfectly consistent with what Chaim Vital is explaining in Rabbi Avidan, and that is that sometimes tremendous concepts, tremendous ideas, notions, etc., are too much for us to handle. They're too difficult for us to digest, not because we're not meant to or we're not supposed to be able to, but because we're on such a low level that it's too much for us. We would collapse, we would break down. And so Hashem, out of mercy, breaks these tasks up, or breaks these concepts up into smaller, more easily manageable pieces. And much the same way as you could say, the Arizal himself said about Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, and Sukkot, you could say about life. Really, ideally, we should all get it right the first time, and that would be it. But we see it doesn't happen. We see that, he himself said we should avoid making reference to the Neshama when we make these Ashkavot. Why? Because no one's really there. And because it's exceedingly difficult for us to perfect the Nefesh, so much more so, literally, not even to speak of the Neshama.
There is the same thing of first Adam and Chava were one being, and maybe that didn't work as well as having them split up in the same way. It's like the task was now, as it can go between the two of them, they'll be able to achieve what one couldn't before. It's also like splitting up the task.
Right, but that creation
one generation.
That creation wasn't by accident. They were created attached, meaning they were unified, but on a very low level. The expectation was, by splitting them up and allowing them, again, with the assistance of their own free will, they have to want to get together, they have to want to get married.
Right, I'm saying, but maybe it's the same thing, that the task was too big for one, the way they were created, that maybe by splitting them, it became somehow easier for that being now to accomplish its task. And in the same way, one being in one generation was only maybe supposed to be Adam, Chava together, and then instead there were many, many, many generations to achieve the same thing.
The Ramban, if you're looking for a friend, you might find him there. He says that that this whole concept of the creation, what happened in Gan Eden, was all spiritual until the point of the Chet, and that's when everything became physical. That's when reality became only what I can see with my eyes, only what I can hear with my ears, and only what I experience and learn do I understand. Up until that point, he holds, and has his explanations and his proofs, that the reality was not physical. So what this means in non-physical terms is very hard for us to understand. But then being created together and being split, that was ideal, that was part of the creation. In the hope that they contribute a component to their unity that was absent beforehand, that depends entirely on them as human beings, and that's their free will, that's their desire to be together, that's they actually want to. How many couples do I talk to dating forever? And it's almost difficult to know. Don't you like her? Man, why don't you guys just get married? How just that desire to make a relationship and make it everything. People are overwhelmed by it. That's the explanation, just like we said now. People are bowled over by this concept of, oh my God, this is so big, this is so huge. But, the desire is there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't force anyone to get married. Right. But that's it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't force anyone to get married. So when he created Adam and Hawa together, the missing component was their desire. And their desire is expressed, it's manifest in them coming together on their own, wanting this, desiring this, making the connection, overcoming their differences and their arguments, etc. And creating a unity that Hashem didn't create by force. He created the potential for it, he created the capacity for it, but that's the one component that Hashem himself couldn't put there, so to speak, because he gave us free will and wants us to be the ones doing it, wants us to be the ones making things happen. And that's a tremendous responsibility for us. So, staying back to this concept of Hoshana Rabba, it relates very directly to what it is, and we're about to finish the Torah, B'zot HaBracha, this concept of making assume beginning and end at the same time. So this is a tremendous message for us. We need to do the best that we can to make everything right and perfect all the time. And yet we see that, Baruch Hashem, the holiday season is divided in such a way that we can connect with these different moods in ways that we can appreciate and focus on them one at a time. It becomes easier for us to make these things happen. And it gives us time to prepare and make sure that we maximize, we get, as much as we can out of the spiritual charge that these days can give us. And life is like this. This is Kohelet. There are times to laugh, there are times to cry, there are times to plant, there are times to harvest. We aren't on a level that we can grab everything at once. And even, Shematically speaking, polish different sides and different aspects of our neshama to the best of our abilities. Hopefully, at least if not in one lifetime, from one chance to the next, we'll come back, in a greater state of repair with more spiritual faculties about us, and hopefully, better honed instincts and inclinations, and whatever we can't do in one shot, as was ideally supposed to be the case, we'll hopefully do at least in as few steps as possible, but in such a way that it's manageable for us. The task is broken up and able to complete it with Hashem. And no more than one. I'm sure no one has any questions. What's your name?
This is Sarah.